June 7th, 1892, Homer Plessy bought a train ticket to Covington from New Orleans, Louisiana. Upon boarding the train, Plessy sits in an empty seat in the whites only designating seating car. A cart attendant noticed where Plessy was seated and ordered him to move to the back of the train car to the blacks only section. Of course, Plessy refused, and he was then arrested by Detective Christopher Kane. What was later discovered is that the entire incident was planned. Plessy was acting on behalf of the Citizens Committee that wanted to protest the newly established Separate Car Act. The Separate Car Act stated that all railroads within the state of Louisiana were required to provide separate but equal accommodations for white and black passengers. The introduction of the Separate Car Act in 1890 not only outraged thousands of African Americans throughout the state of Louisiana, but also the railroad companies. They were now required to build more passenger train cars, which meant less revenue. Later on, Plessy appeared in the Criminal District Court of New Orleans, where he argued that the Separate Car Act denied him of rights that were granted to him through the 13th and 14th Amendments in the Constitution. However, Judge John H. Ferguson felt differently. He ruled that the state of Louisiana obtained the right to regulate the policies of railroad companies as long as they ran within state lines. Plessy then filed a petition against Judge Ferguson with the Louisiana Supreme Court. The Louisiana Supreme Court sided with Ferguson, so Plessy appealed again, this time to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments from both Plessy and Ferguson on April 13th, 1896. The question being challenged in this case was, did the Separate Car Act of 1890 violate the Equal Protection Clause present in the 14th Amendment? The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Ferguson on a 7-1 vote on May 18, 1896. The reasoning behind the ruling of the Supreme Court's decision stated that the separate treatment and conditions in public services did not mean that African Americans were inferior to whites. They then went on to establish that all matters of segregation to be deemed constitutional. The ruling in the Plessy versus Ferguson case went on to be the basis of the separate but equal doctrine, a legal doctrine that established that racial segregation did not necessarily violate the 14th Amendment. This led to the creation of Jim Crow laws that prohibited blacks from entering the same restaurants and social atmospheres as whites. The decision of this case also led to the segregation of public schools throughout the nation. This will put a strain on the African American community to continue to educate their children without being offered the same resources, supplies, and teaching staff as the white only schools. The only judge on the panel in the 1896 case of Plessy versus Ferguson that sided with Plessy was John Marshall Harlan. Harlan stated that all citizens are equal before the law and predicted that decision known as one of the worst judicial decisions in history.